What's the best overdrive pedal for a Vox AC30? Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett and welcome to this Overdrive Shootout specifically for a Vox AC30. Now this is for the modern Vox AC30, and the one that I have here is the C2X. So this is the higher end model that has the Alnico Blue speakers by Celestion. This one also happens to have kind of a cool Tolex on it. It's a really nice amplifier. But I do want to make sure that I say that sort of specifically, that this is for the current production Vox AC30. A lot of differences over the years between AC30 models depending on what era you're talking about, and because of that you might get a variance in what pedals work with what, because they were similar but different amplifiers. So this is specific to this amplifier, which is going to be probably the most common one that's around nowadays. So I've picked 4 overdrive pedals that I think all work particularly well. In fact, I was gonna do a whole thing where at the end I tell you which one's my favorite, but I actually didn't have a favorite. I think they all really work and they all do something similar but with their own little unique fingerprint on it, and they could each be used for different applications. Now I did pick these based on common types of overdrive circuits. So we have an OD3 by Boss. This is one that's kind of similar to the Nobels. It's in that sort of range. We have the Wampler Moxie. Now the Wampler Moxie is a modified tube screamer, so that's my tube screamer selection, which I'll talk about more in a minute. We have the Studio Daydream KCM-OD Gold. This is my Klon selection, my Klon Centaur clone. And then we have the Vick Audio Mount Pleasant, which is my blues breaker selection, right? So you got an OD3, kind of like a Nobel's tube screamer, a clone, and a blues breaker style overdrive. All right, so first of all, we have the Boss OD3. This, in my opinion, is actually the best of the Boss overdrives. I've never connected with the SD1. Obviously, many of you love the SD1, so I'm not going to knock it. It's just style-wise, it doesn't work for me. This one is a little bit smoother, and I really like how it integrates with the AC30. It has a clarity to it, but it has a little bit of compression. It's not quite in the tube screamer realm as far as drive and the mid-ranginess, but it's kind of in that direction a little bit. It just works really well. I think one of the things I like about this is it's somewhere between a transparent overdrive and a tube screamer, like halfway in the middle. You could use it as a boost, you could use it as a drive, and I think it works really well in both the top boost and the normal settings. Alright, next up we have the Wampler Moxie. Now I mentioned this is a modified tube screamer. Specifically, it's a modified TS10. What I really love about this pedal is the voice switch. The voice switch really opens up the presence and the clarity. It's not like a brightness switch. It's Tube screamers, and this is coming from someone who loves tube screamers. Tube screamers have this sort of paradox about them where it's like they sometimes can sound a little bit muffled and yet very bright at the same time. It's a unique kind of sound. Now, if you know how to use a tube screamer, I think you can get amazing tones with them, and I absolutely love them. In fact, I pretty much always keep either a TS-808 or a TS-9 in my bag whenever I go to a gig, loaded with a 9-volt battery, so that in case anything ever happens with my pedal board, I've got kind of like Old Faithful there with me to just plug right in and roll. That always makes me feel better. It's something I can always rely on. They sound great. But again, this one is probably one of my favorite tube screamers ever, and I don't say that lightly. This is not sponsored, by the way. Some of these were sponsored reviews when I first did them, but this is not a sponsored video. I just absolutely love this pedal. Again, opening up that top end I think really works with the AC30, and this one has a little bit more of that kind of throaty, mid-rangey growl, as you would expect, than the OD3, a little bit more gain. So this is one that I think if you really want to push a little bit more compression and a little bit more drive, this one works really well. All right, next we have the Studio Daydream. This is the KCM-OD Gold. Now, this is a high-end pedal. This one's more expensive than the others. There are obviously other clones out there that you can get. And I am running this specifically in its kind of clone mode. It's got all these extra switches on the side. You can really fine-tune it. But this one I'm just running kind of in its basic clone sound. This one I think is by far the best if you want the transparent open sound. If you want to just make it sound like the AC30 is kind of driving on its own and have that option, I think this one is the closest to that. It does have a little bit of its own voice. Clones kind of do this like upper mid-rangey, almost like a nasally snarl to them when you really get them driving. And this one, again, I think this one works especially well if you're doing big, crunchy rhythm tones, because it keeps that clarity and it keeps that sort of open crunchiness, as opposed to, you know, sometimes you want a little bit more of a compressed tone for a lead, and then you might want a bit more of an open tone for a rhythm. At least that's how I feel about it. And this one I thought worked really, really well for that. Also, if you were using more of the drive from the amp and you paired it with this one, it could really sound like your AC30 is just wide open at a more manageable volume. All right, now lastly, we have the Vick Audio Mount Pleasant. This is one of my favorite blues breaker clones, and this one is a pretty straightforward blues breaker, except it also has this high cut switch in the middle. Now, in that first part, with the Stratocaster into the top boost channel, I had it on the high cut 1. When I switch over, I'm about to use a Gibson SG into the normal channel. I'm going to switch it back to no cut, which is the center setting, so it's not cutting any of the top end. With the Strat into the top boost channel, I wanted to just kind of roll off those highs a little bit. This one's probably the lowest gain of all of them, but it has kind of this musical sweetness to it that I like. I've always loved a blues breaker into an AC30. The two I think just pair particularly well, and this one is no exception. This one I think it just sounds good. Now, I was running it, and I am running it throughout this video, with a little bit of drive, kind of an edge of breakup from the amp itself. This is another one I think kind of similar to the clone, where if you run a little bit more drive with the amp, this one could just push you into this beautifully sweet territory. Very little hint of compression. This one just does its own thing, but again, it has this musical quality to it where it really worked with the signal of the guitar and the signal of the amp. So again, I mentioned in that first jam you just heard, I was using a Fender Stratocaster. Now that's loaded with this great set of single-tone 60s style pickups and going into the top boost channel. I am going into the high gain input. A lot of times when I play AC30s, I like to go into the low gain input, but I know more of you will probably play the high gain input, so that's what I'm doing for the video. It's for you guys. Do it for you guys. So as I mentioned, I did run this one a little differently. With the Stratocaster, I had it on high cut 1. Now with the SG, I'm going to have it on no cut. The only other change that I'm making in the pedals is with the clone. And with that one, I've had the treble pushed slightly on the pedal. When I push the gain harder with the SG, I am going to turn the treble back a little bit. It was being more of an open pedal, it was a little too snarly, I thought, with the gain pushed. Oddly enough, with the SG, with the Stratocaster and the top boost, I thought it worked. With the SG, I thought there was this like kind of hint of brightness that I didn't like. which is kind of strange. I would have expected it to be the other way around, but it wasn't. So I just, when I roll the gain up for the second part of it, I'm just going to turn the treble back a little bit. For the rest of it, I'm just kind of keeping them as is, basic settings. And again, I showed the settings of the Vox AC30, the Stratocaster into the top boost, the Gibson SG, that's loaded with Lust for Tone 61 Lustbuckers, that's going into the normal channel. And I am using a generous amount of the tone cut on the Vox. I think that's one of the keys to getting a good sound, particularly out of these modern Vox amps, whether you're talking about the AC30, the AC15, or other ones. The tone cut is there for a reason. These can be really, really bright and edgy amplifiers, and so that's where I like it. I think that works really well. So which of these were your favorite? Please let us know in the comments. I do want to mention there are obviously some other ones throughout the years that people have loved with an AC30 that I didn't do here. The Crowther Hotcake is one that comes to mind. Another one, the obvious one, would be some kind of a treble booster. The thing about those is they're not nearly as accessible, and even though there are some companies making some really cool treble boosters, they're still not around as much. And you know, the Crowther Hotcake, I'm sure there are people who make clones of those, but those are not as accessible either. So I wanted to do overdrives that were a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier to find, and ones that you might already have, right? If you pick up an AC30 and you already have a handful of pedals, chances are you probably have a Blues Breaker, a clone, a Tube Screamer, something like that in your lineup already, so figuring out which one of what's commonly around would pair well with it. But let us know, what is your favorite? Let us know which of these you like the best. What other pedals out there do you think pair well with an AC30? I'm Jack Fossett. Stick around for some SG tones. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Support me on Patreon. Follow me on Jack Fossett. All the usual sorts of things that, you know, we're supposed to say to engage, to connect.